And so I understand that Nick has set up for you guys Plural Leadership yesterday. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Tell me what he set up. I never know with Nick, like what he's gonna do. It's always valuable, but I'm like, what exactly did he say? Like, what's the framework that you guys have so far?
One of the things we did the first week was we did the core clarity work.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
And so we talked a little bit about like gifting and allowing people to work kind of within their gifting, and so we did a little bit of that. That was kind of the first week, and so he's talked a little bit about just a little bit about that, and then decentralizing leadership was kind of the conversation yesterday.
Yeah.
There's probably more.
We talked about adaptive versus technical.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay.
Kind of at the end. But yeah, I think most of it was kind of like he used NBC as the model and told us a lot about how it works, and being conscious of the power structure and who has it.
And in some ways, like Nick is a really interesting case study. This is just like observational, but he has a value of like plural leadership more than like most people I have ever met. However, when you are starting a church plant, and there's all this work to be done, sometimes people don't want to do it. So if people don't want to do it, who does it then fall on? The pastor. So you have this like sort of difference, and that actually kind of leads into like my first kind of point. I want to talk, that's a very good just starting point. I want to talk specifically about some barriers to plural leadership, and then like what I call like pathway. Okay, so we will talk about each one of these. We'll sort of do exactly what we've been doing about, that reminds me of this one time that happened, in the situation. I'll ask questions, kind of, hey, what do you guys think about that? Have you seen this? Like, let's hear an example. Just because I think that when we talk through what we're experiencing, that really gives us kind of another angle. So the first sort of barrier is what one of my favorite scholars calls, and Klaus, you maybe remember, no, don't be on the spot, but if you remember some of this, feel free to chime in, is this idea of espoused theory versus theory in use. So let's say that I am somebody at church. Let's say I'm on the greeting team, okay? And my espoused theory, what I say I believe, is I am a person who wants to welcome new people in this church, okay? And I mean that. However, life is busy and things are crazy, and I maybe haven't seen some of my good friends throughout the week, so when my good friends come into church, I kind of end up talking to them. Like, my theory in use is it really that I'm welcoming new people? Oftentimes there's a gap there, and specifically when we talk about giving voice to others. No, I want to, this is what I believe and this is what I think, but let's use Nick as an example here. Like, he's somebody who very much believes in plural leadership, but when push comes to shove, like, if something's going to get done or not going to get done, like, Nick will step up and do it. Maybe even at the cost of other voices coming in, right? And that's a really hard thing to navigate. Another example, in my own business, like I work like side by side with my husband, so this is relevant because different ones of you guys are working sort of in partnership with your spouse. We co-own our business, okay, and some of the biggest like struggles are in that sort of balancing of dynamic or power. He is off the wall creative, just a brilliant storyteller and artist, and I am incredibly driven, the high functioning, overly educated, like, let's get this crap done right now. I will propose to our clients, like, hey, we want to make this film for you, and we're going to make this high quality product, and it's all going to be about the thing. But that actually takes a lot of time to do. And when push comes to shove, I'm like, just get that crap out the door. Like, I've literally heard myself say that the other day, just get that crap out the door. Okay, getting that crap out the door is my theory in use. Making high quality product is my espoused theory. What we need are people, partners, teams that can point out the difference. one thing, especially sort of in an organization like a church where there's a natural hierarchy no matter what you do, and I actually don't think that a natural hierarchy is a bad thing. I think that some hierarchy is fine because you're defining roles and responsibilities. The trick is, can you ascribe cultural power to these different people while still having hierarchy? That's the really big struggle. But who around you will tell you there's a gap? Who around you will tell you you're not necessarily doing this? It may just be your partner in crime, and if you're maybe your elder board, it may be maybe an intern. Like, you may have an intern that's specifically assigned to telling you, hey, what you said to all those people and what you actually did was totally different. Because when we do that, when we say one thing, we believe one thing, and do something different, what the message that sends is other voices are not as important. Like, we've decided on something, but in the end, I'm going to just do what I want to do. I don't think we actually mean to send that. I mean, it's sort of an intentions versus actual reaction thing, but it sends a mixed message. And when people get mixed messages, they shut down. Okay, I don't know how to approach that. I have another client who, she runs a large nonprofit organization. Actually, she's a vice president in a large nonprofit organization. And she always tells me, Michaela, I want you to do something that we've never seen before. Okay, all right, no pressure.
There's only 100 years of
yeah,
film.
Right, yeah. She's like, do something we've never seen before. And so I say, okay, yeah, like, let me just go and think about that. Like, yeah, all right. And then I go and, like, Dan and I spend all this time, and, like, you know, we've been given a small amount of money to, like, come up with an idea, and we come back and it's good, right? Like, the idea is actually good and fairly innovative. And she's like, oh, that's great, but we don't have any money. And I'm like, why? How can you ask me to, you know, create something but have no money? Well, but the truth is, because both are true, right? And that's a message that we send to people a lot. That really, like, so what she's done there, without, you know, meaning to, is kind of shut down my voice a bit. All right, so I'm now like, okay, where is my voice in this? What will I contribute? And it's all because her espoused theory and theory and use are different. Is this something that rings true with you guys, both in your own practice or people you've worked under or alongside of?
I think so. Like, it creates a level of unpredictability.
Yeah.
Like, you're not entirely sure what the vision is then. I remember do you know who Peter Rollins is? Mm-hmm. He talks a lot about things like this, not necessarily pertaining to leadership, but he always used the example of like a group of people talking about the evils of corporate greed in a Starbucks. You know, like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the irony there.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. What about, okay, so when you guys think about, like, any church plant or nonprofit organization, creative ministry, sort of starts out with a set of values, right? Some of the values of Northland Village Church, the biggest one is reconciliation. Yeah, I'm sure you guys have even probably heard Nick talk about that. We're supposed to be reconciling, we espouse that we want to reconcile the D church to the church, you know, neighbor to neighbor, people to God, all of these different levels. But I wonder what would happen if we actually looked at the organization, right? And the biggest thing here is, does that make our organization bad? No, it makes it human. And the extra flawedness comes when you can't have conversations about those gaps. When you can't sit down, like, on a leadership team and say, how are we doing on our, like, sort of big picture value stuff? Because you'll have these individual values as leaders, but then your group will also have these agreed upon values. And there will be gaps between your group's agreed upon values and what your group actually does, you know? I'll look at Level Ground. Like, we sponsor Level Ground. They're huge. Level Ground is a festival doing incredible work at the intersection of faith and LGBT conversations. And they espouse to create safe space for dialogue, like, through art. between communities and among different people who either attach to LGBT, faith, or this kind of anywhere in between. Okay, that is an incredibly difficult mission to accomplish. It just is. It's sensitive and loaded in terms of historical data. Do they actually totally accomplish it? Probably not. And realizing that there's that gap is really the thing that moves you as an organization and as a group of people to continue to move towards your mission or to adapt. Like, you might get to a point 2 or 3 years into, you know, your group where you're like, okay, the wellness part of this, like, is not taking off as much as we really thought it was. It's all about, or the wellness, the physical part isn't, but it's all about, like, people are really interested in, like, what people eat. Okay, that might be an adaptation that you guys make because, you know, you've realized there's a gap in your espoused theory and theory in use, and that people actually gravitate more towards one or the other. So again, I would say having people and having groups that can have the conversations out loud about what the gaps are, being able to have the conversation with yourself too, right? Like, that's sort of one of the biggest things is, hey, I am not actually doing what I'm saying I'm doing. That sort of self-awareness. There's 3 things in there. It's self-awareness, self-reflection, and self-discipline. Self-awareness is to be able to say, I understand how my current self is affecting this moment and the people around me. Self-reflection is to say, I can, you know, critique and analyze and learn from how myself engaged people in a past situation. And then self-discipline is, I can understand and work on and move toward how myself affects people in a future situation. So being able to constantly sort of ask those questions, again, sort of helps you identify these differences. Okay, questions, thoughts on that one?
I think that's really good. I think it's important to, I think it takes a lot of security to have those conversations, because I think I've been on past organizations where people ask for feedback, but you get a certain sense that if you go through it in full force, they're not going to receive it well.
Yeah.
So I think that can create a tough dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing one person doing it will not help really the whole leadership team.
Yeah, you said a couple things there that are really important. One thing you said is create and then maintain the gap, right? There's always going to be a gap. That's human tendency. Mm-hmm. The problem comes when the gap is maintained and that gap never closes. Mm-hmm. And then you said something that, okay, so we want our ideas and what we do, we want everyone to agree on them, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes that doesn't happen. You know, I started on the elder board here for 4 years, and there's one woman in particular, Andrew knows her. Her name's Carol. She's lovely. You guys might know her. She's lovely and feisty and just loves to verbally throw punches and thinks it's like sport, you know. At first, like 3 months of knowing her, I didn't realize that, and I thought she hates me. And then I realized, oh, that's her style. Okay, I can kind of put my boxing gloves on and go back and forth here. There were a lot of times in elder meetings that we fell on very different sides of an idea. And we would, largely because it was her style, not because it was like the most healthy way to approach it, we would box out these ideas verbally, box them out. And there were a lot of times where we settled on her idea or we settled on my idea and the other person wasn't really on the same page. The trick is having the ethos to agree upon, once we make a decision, that is our decision. Mm. So there were certain things we did that I thought weren't great ideas, but like, I'm not going to name any of those because those aren't, that's not what happened. What happened is we decided on something, and that's the thing that we moved forward, and that's the thing that we got behind. So even more than agreeing upon everything, it's a resolve to get behind the group's decisions. I think that, you know what I mean? Because if you're waiting for everyone to agree on everything, that can sometimes get a little watered down. Because yeah, we agree on all these things up here, but when we get down here, like, we don't agree on the same things. We're human people, and sometimes on your boards, it's really crucial to have people who don't agree. Like, you know, you may have some very conservative people on your board just so that you can have kind of a dissenting voice. That's actually something we'll talk about later. a couple of things that you guys talked about, both Morgan and Klaus, lead us into the second one, though, the second like barrier, and that is defensiveness. I am the most defensive person, you know, just sort of by nature. It is a skill I have been a skill. It is a flaw. Right there, you can see. It is a flaw I've been trying to break down. Yeah, a skill I've honed. Wait a minute, it's not a good thing. Been trying to break that down for a while. I read this article in seminary that kind of just pinpointed it for me, and I think it's something that might like resonate with all of you. Like everyone here has like a bachelor's degree, has maybe even a master's degree, has ambition to start something. You're all high-functioning people, like really high-functioning people. You've probably spent the majority of your academic, maybe even business career being good and being right? Like being good at things and being right. This author, his name is Chris Argyris, talks about the most difficult people to teach are smart people. And the most difficult people to learn new lessons are people who have high achievement. This, you know, really falls into like what you're talking about. And that really resonated with me. Okay, yeah, I get A's in school and I'm used to people, you know, writing good things and saying good work, that when somebody tells me I'm wrong, like my first gut instinct is to not believe them. No. Like, or to judge myself instead of by my actions, by my intentions, right? So like, you know, Rebecca, if you, you know, kind of said something here to me and you said like, I think that shirt you have is really, you know, not great. I'd be like, you know, by that action, I might say, wow, Rebecca is like kind of a rude person, you know, that might be what I'm thinking. And Rebecca might say, oh, but what I meant was that like, there's a big spill on the side of it and that you shouldn't be wearing that today. What I meant was something helpful. And instead what I heard is, there's a difference sometimes between what we intend and what's actually received. And a practice that has begun to shave away that natural defensiveness in me is just to say, like, you are right and I was wrong. Like, just to say that. You were right and I was wrong. I usually give this sort of challenge I teach a couple different classes on this kind of stuff, and the first week I'll give everyone the challenge, like, okay, so you know, everyone will have an argument with somebody else over the next week, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a parent or a child or somebody at the grocery store, like depending on what's going on, right? Can you say, no matter what you think, you were right and I was wrong? And I'll give that same challenge to you guys. Like, I won't be here next week to check in and see if that happened. But can you say, you know, sort of, my husband says to me, like, I really, you know, you didn't respond to these emails quick enough to this client. You were right and I was wrong, you know? Or my husband says, you really hurt my feelings when you said that, you know, I'm talking all about work here, but, or even in marriage, you really hurt my feelings when, you said that the salmon I made had too much salt in it, whatever. I'm using very, you know, mundane examples. What I meant was this and this. Like, but, I mean, just to say, like, oh, you're right and I was wrong. You will be amazed at what that starts to break down, both in yourself and people around you. If you can take that into either group leadership or some of you are further along in your actual church planting thing. So if you can take that into your current ministry settings, your current job settings, or even just in relationships, like you'll start to notice like that defensiveness be broken down a little bit. And I find that some people are actually really good at this, right? Admitting when they're wrong. You guys have any of those people like in your lives who are like actually good at admitting like when they're wrong? No.
He's pretty good.
You're pretty good.
I'm not that good.
Isn't that funny?
But
Yeah, isn't that funny? My husband's a lot better at it than I am as well. Yeah.
maybe it's just that you're more often right, so it's tougher for you.
Yeah.
Be careful.
That's probably very true.
Okay, so I do have one question with that,
Yeah.
though, is, so I hear the practice, and I think it's a good one. What do you do with the internal stuff
Yeah.
because, you know, obviously you can say that and just be no, like, I don't believe that, I don't believe you know.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, you know, I have plenty of that. I can have lots of distance. I think I have a lot of junk inside. I'm
Yep.
able to hide it a lot and keep it in. So, how do you think that? I mean, because I think it's still a good practice of just saying,
It's a great
there's
question.
a partial truth, but can you speak to that? Because I mean, I think you can cause dissonance in yourself
Definitely can.
if you're saying that and you
Yeah.
don't believe it at all.
I'm really glad you said that. Dan and I, both in business and in our marriage, we have sort of a set of rules, right? Just kind of like, these are things that are off limits. These are things, you know, we can recognize someone's having this bad day, or, hey, you know, just take over this day. One of the rules we have is, in an argument, like sort of the person who is wrong, we will always have a follow-up conversation. Always. It is set that we can then go back later, after we've apologized, after we've let that sit, after we have defused it. I'm talking either hours later or like a day later, and say, okay, can I now talk to you about what I actually meant and what was actually happening with me? But then you're able to talk about it in a way that's not trying to win the argument, and in a way that's not trying to protect like sort of this image of yourself. You're then talking about it in a, you know, I just had this conversation with my mom actually. Like, she was telling me a story about work. She owns her own business. We sort of talk a lot about those kind of things, and I'm just much more like harsh in some ways than she is. And she was telling me this story. And it was like going for a long time, and I was like, this is, it's fine, but I was like, what's the point of this story? Like, and I legitimately meant, like, I get that you're trying to explain something to me, and I'm missing it. What is the point? Like, I want to learn whatever you're telling me. Oh my gosh, that is not how it came across. All it came across was shut the hell up. Like, you know, like, what's the point? I tried to explain that to her. That went really poorly. So then I went into, you were right, I was wrong. Like, I'm very sorry, very, very sorry. A week later, I called her and I was like, hey, like, you know, that was just like, I want us to be able to have that kind of conflict, because I actually think that conflict is a really important part of openness and dialogue, right? And if you can actually have conflict in which the person, and you're not being a bunch of defensive, just defending your own perspective, you actually start to move towards the other person a little bit. And I said, you know, we had that argument. I want us to be able to have arguments because I think it's not a bad thing. But I also like really did not mean for what to happen to him. I didn't mean for that. So I'd love to break it down and see where I went wrong, but also tell you where I was trying to come at it from. And that went really well. That's the way that I do it, is sort of have this kind of follow-up conversation. As long as that follow-up conversation is not, okay, well, now that we've settled down, let me tell you why I was right. Like, that's a really important part, because if that comes back to it, then it just reignites an argument. I'm giving like fairly emotional examples, like my husband and my mom. Like, in your organizations, like, you may have more of a professional or even just a friendship relationship with people in which some of those boundaries are kind of there, and especially if you're the pastor, you're the leader, people are, as soon as you sort of defend your position, they're going to back down. Like, that's going to be the majority dynamic. Not every person, not my lovely friend Carol that I just described. Like, she would not back down at all in that kind of moment. But the majority of people are going to back down to the pastor or the leader. There's really two sides of it, right? When you're the one sort of being defensive or sort of in the wrong, and then when you're the one who didn't mean it and really needs to come back the other way. Other ideas on how you can sort of not internalize it all.
I have a question. How do you say, like, you disagree with whatever the decision is, and you've kind of got past that, and then the decision that you disagreed with is kind of like becomes the thing that we do. Like, how do you not either disengage or like sabotage it, or like how do you like just passive aggressive against it? Like, how do you actually just get on board with it even though you disagree with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great thing. Great question. I think that first of all, in the decision-making process with a group, like, any decision that comes out of a group must be an answer to like your mission, all right? So like, in that regard, your decisions are protected, even if they're not your favorite decisions. And on some level, if they're going after your mission, you really should be able to get behind it. And also, like, I don't want to say like just let it go, because that's not very helpful. But you have a lot of things to do in a day, and a lot of like energy to be spent. And if your energy is not going towards something, like, feel free to put it towards something else. And I think that's even a healthy boundary, without necessarily, like, there's a lot of things we've done at this church, especially like while I was on elder staff, that I was like, I'm not sure that I really am feeling that. Like, we just reframed all of our ministries, okay, in terms of tables. I thought it was a great idea, actually, but that was a sort of people were all over the board with that, because we're taking a big risk, and it's on some level not the most easy thing to access. The people who sort of, I noticed and watched, the people who were less into that have now put their energy kind of into something else. Not in a way, though, that fights this, just in a way where, okay, some people had some strong energy towards that, they're gonna do that. And in organizations, you know, thrives when you have like a number of people working together for this mission, right? And so, like, I don't mean to be laissez-faire, but part of me says, like, put your energy somewhere else. Like, don't put your energy towards trying to undo something that's already been done, unless, of course, it's toxic to your organization. Then, you know, you're going to want to follow a certain number of you're going to want to go through the appropriate channels for that anyway. But if something's toxic or just not helpful, then bring that back up in front of, like, whoever the group of people who are making decisions are. Yeah.
I had just a thought on that as well. We've been a part of some churches and organizations that haven't been the most healthy. And one thing that I also thought, I wrote this down actually when you were talking a second ago, was that if there's a lot of self-reflection and the ability to point out things that are wrong, I think people feel safer to make decisions that they don't necessarily agree with, because they know they're not, like, they know if they don't work, the group's going to be like actually able to hear that. Like, whereas if there's no self-reflection, there's no ability to hear that, then people start getting afraid, well, there's this decision, if it's not right, well, then we'll make another one I don't agree with, and then another one, and they'll never be revisited.
Definitely. One of the things that author that Nick was talking about yesterday, adaptive versus technical, what you guys are all doing here is adaptive. It will involve many technical moments, and you will make decisions that are, and your team members will make decisions that are technical. Large scale, though, you're doing adaptive work, right? That kind of change and those kind of decisions require a certain type of environment. They require an environment that is two things, both safe and also challenging. So it has to be safe enough, like what you're talking about here, that people can express and what I would say wrestle with sort of these deeply held assumptions that are kind of implanted on me on levels I'm not even sure are there, right? Like, but it has to also be challenging enough that people are motivated towards change and progress, right? So that safety and challenge is a hugely difficult thing to accomplish, and usually falls on the role of, this is kind of where I think that the hierarchy, while we like flatten leadership, people who are specifically attending to cultivating these kind of environments are really important, right? And that usually falls on the shoulders of the pastor team or the leaders, like the top people in the organization. And if you are doing that, like on behalf and for the benefit of the multiple voices who are contributing to leadership, then you're doing a service, right? You're not doing just sort of a here's my way or the highway thing. You're, cultivating this space in which other voices and decisions can fruitfully occur. You said safety there, and that just like really made me think about, and I would actually recommend that book, Leadership on the Line, the yellow one that Nick was showing. Like, it's just a great thought thing. And on that vein, another book that I just read that is incredibly good. It might sound a little bit off and maybe my own bias, but it's called Creativity, Inc. Ed Catmull, the guy who, there's 3 different people who are kind of at the head of Pixar. And Steve Jobs, lots of money, lots of vision. John Lasseter, creative genius. And Ed Catmull, kind of the guy who is the president and sort of runs the organization. And he talks all about failures and like things that are just like applicable in every form of leadership. It's a great book that just came out recently. Other thoughts or questions?
I had a thought when you were talking about how to deal with a lot of this internally, if it's discordant or whatever, coming from a championship grudge holding and defensive family. So it's something I've been thinking about for like the past year, is just being able to like forgive the small things, like the things that feel like slights to me from people, but I'm sure they weren't intended as slights, but being able to actually forgive those and release them has been really helpful to me. I'm gonna have a hard time with this. You were right, I was wrong. but I've noticed that, and I feel happier, and I feel healthier, and I feel like I'm able to see them the way I want to see them, rather than kind of always piling things to hold against people.
Do you have something that you can share about like how you do that?
I think I just really realized I've had a really difficult time with my immediate family, because they still do all of that. And I've thought about the ways that I feel like they're really unhappy, and I didn't want to be the same. Yeah. And so I'm sure God is helping me do that. It's not something I'm good at, but trying to be aware of like how it's a self-awareness thing. Being aware of like, they said this, that's making me feel this. I'm really sensitive and really defensive, which is a bad combination. Yeah. It's making me feel this
things too.
Yeah. But so I'm very, very sensitive. So if someone says or does something, kind of trying to think like, on a large scale, like how's this affecting me? I mean, if it's like a close friend or something, it's also something I'll bring up.
Yeah.
But if it's like something in passing, somebody's rude, I try very hard to like just recognize, be like it's a small thing that I can forgive, and that frees me from it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
This kind of goes back to what John was talking about, like on a different scale. You're talking individual relationships here, you're talking like organizational decisions, but like you only have so many hours in a day. You only have so many like years in life, and I don't know, like this is a totally unrelated thing, but relates. Like I have been like, I do that a lot. I have been pressing forward towards this like goal of getting my PhD done. Like I wanted to do it in 3 years, which is absurd, like literally absurd. And I was pressing forward, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. It was coming at a lot of cost to go that fast. It was coming at like the cost of like my physical, spiritual, and mental health. Like, and I made a decision earlier this summer to back everything up just 1 quarter, okay? Just to not take my comps this summer, just to take them in the fall, and just to let go of it. So what I've been saying to people when they ask about it, or ask about my trajectory, is that healthy decisions lead to other healthy decisions. And unhealthy decisions lead to other unhealthy decisions. I mean, you guys probably have a ton to say about that. But like, I have, been hiking more this summer than I have been in a year. Like, I have spent time with good friends. Like, I have spent time like in the Word more than I have in a while. Like, it really, because one thing like sort of leads to another and leads to another. And so when we hold on to bitterness, or when we sort of develop in our mind's eye how we might sabotage a decision that's been made at the church, that leads to other really unhealthy behaviors. And so sort of that pivot just in this direction, I actually think has a lot of bearing on like the kind of person we are and how we interact with people. And in terms of this whole plural leadership idea, allows space for other people. Like the more open that we are, the more open people will perceive us as. And that's something that, with me goes in ebbs and flows. Like a lot of it is like, what is my mental, spiritual, and physical state of like health right now? And that's something that will be jeopardized and compromised and threatened as you guys develop your organizations, because you will be busy, you will be on the ground, you will be doing 25 things instead of 1 thing in a week, because that's what church planters and startups do. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think one of the practices that I've had to learn the hard way is I was really good at saying like I'm sorry, but I'm to do this. You know, I'm sorry, but I was trying, you know. And
But,
what I found out was like, that wasn't saying you were
Sorry,
sorry,
but not
you know.
Right.
Now I
Really
did. I
say
came from a
this,
family
yeah.
that meant you were sorry, but you were ultimately right. And you know, and so like part of my adult education has been learning to just put the period. You know, I'm sorry, period. And what I found is that I've been amazed at people's willingness to then kind of seek out my intentions, like seek to know my intentions. And so like I've noticed that in the relationships where I have made it an effort to say, you know, I'm sorry, or you know, you are right and I was wrong, that there has been that kind of reciprocal nature.
It immediately breaks something down.
Yeah, of that sense of like, even if there was a disagreement, there is now kind of and it's not 100%, there are jerks out there, there are, you know, hurt people out there that can't get there, but there are a lot of people who want to know what my intentions are, want to know what I'm feeling, or want to know what I'm struggling with. You know, if I'm against something, they want to know why. But typically only when I'm willing to kind of admit, you know, my role in that kind of breakdown of the relationship. And it's like I said, it's really hard. I still have to catch myself on it constantly because that natural defensiveness has been so ingrained over the years. But I can see the fruit of it, and it kind of creates a hunger in me for more of that practice. And I was going to say the other part is, I think, having like people that you are able to be accountable with, or people that you're able to kind of share those struggles with, you know, like whether it's people who are also, I know like NVC has this innovators group, and we haven't been able to be a deep part of it, but just going to some of the meetings and talking to people who are trying to start stuff, like that for me is so helpful, because it's like people who are running into the same walls, people who are tired with the same, you know, the same exhaustion, you know, even if they're doing very different things, they're all kind of hitting those same roadblocks, hitting a lot of those same frustrations. And so it's a place to kind of support each other in that, and to say, like, okay, how do I understand that? Because I just went through that 2 weeks ago, or something like that.
What is another layer of that plural leadership? Like you have your like core people in your organization that you're making these decisions with, but then you have like your peers, and you're like both in like relational dialogue and sort of like an uplifting thing, but you're also learning a ton from them. And so you're, oh, they made that mistake, like we don't have to, you know, that kind of thing. So it's like, that's like why this is so valuable. Like I would encourage you guys, like whenever this is done, like y'all should be in regular conversation with each other, like about, hey, we're trying this, and what do you think about this? And are you guys all LA based, or are some of you not LA based?
In Michigan.
Michigan, yeah. San Diego, Michigan, LA, yeah. So I mean, whether it's like Skype catch-ups or Google Hangouts, like those things actually go a long way. And there are people who are running like the same race that you are. Because like when you do a church plant or you do an organization, like very few of you will have the funds up front to have like a 7-person paid staff. Okay, so you have these staff members who are either part-time or totally volunteer, or you have no staff members and you have elders who are volunteer. You might even be volunteer. I don't know how it's going to work. What I mean by that is like you may very well be committing a much larger portion of time to this thing that you're so deeply hungry for than anybody else. And it may feel at times like nobody else gives a crap, you know? And it probably will feel like that. And it's not true. They just have multiple things they're doing and they're not in your position. But the people around these tables, like in other sort of, you know, groups like that, are uniquely in similar positions as you guys. And so like keeping those conversations open is really important. The last sort of barrier that we'll talk about, I'll do this one sort of briefly. Huge barrier to plural leadership, one that I've noticed myself again. This is like a list of like my failures. That's like basically what it comes down to, right? Is doing work reactively rather than proactively. So you'll notice that a lot of these things are focused on you guys and how that sets you up for good plural leadership more than like the structure of your organization. But okay, so you know it's a Tuesday. My email box fills up with like all these things that clients need, and 3 or 4 of them are things that probably like other people on our team should be doing, but I think, oh, I should just hurry up and get this done with. I'll just respond. I'll just do it because I'm right here. I'm thinking about it. But what that does is I'm reacting to everything. I'm setting a precedent, A, that I'm the one who should handle all these things, and B, again, like carving such a large space for my voice that no one else's voice is there. Now, on the flip side of that, it's like to be able to move away from reactive work mode, you really have to sort of practice zooming in and zooming out, right? Like so, some moments call for zooming in. Some moments call for, okay, we're painting the walls together at the church and we're all here and we're talking about each other's lives, and that's the kind of moment this is. That is a very zoomed in moment, okay? That's a moment that is less easy to, you're reacting, but it's maybe okay. You're reacting by, oh, this wall's done, let's move to that wall. That's like a normal reactive. Maybe falls into the technical category, what you guys were talking about yesterday. But then there's like this big picture stuff, like, okay, we're planning sort of all of our milestones for the next year, and we're trying to figure out like exactly where we're going and apply for our, legal stuff and this kind of stuff. And other people aren't really contributing, in the way that you hope they would. Maybe because they have 5 jobs, or maybe because they, I don't know, maybe they just have a different expectation of what it means to be involved. Which is always something to be really good and clear about. What are expectations amongst the group? It would be really easy in those moments just to do all of it, right? Just to do everything. But that is exactly how you find like the burned out pastor who's been doing everything for 7 years or 5 years. Or you find the pastor who's up on a pedestal and nobody else really does much with him or her because they're doing everything themselves. And that happens largely out of a mindset of reacting to work, okay? If you're sort of setting things up a bit more proactively and able to not micromanage, you're saying, oh no, the legal stuff over there, so-and-so is gonna handle that. And even if they don't handle it in my time frame, they're gonna handle it. Again, it's a kind of a constant battle with yourself, right? A lot of these things, in order to allow for multiple voices to be present in any organization, are battling with yourself. Basically, getting yourself out of the way over and over and over again every day. Because it will be most natural, both because you're the one who's in leadership and because it's probably generally a commonality in people who start things to be the one doing things. So that's just sort of a kind of last quick one there. Other like sort of general thoughts on even other barriers that you guys thought before we moved to sort of these kind of things that help enable plural leadership.
How do you, the last one kind of spoke to this a little bit, but how do you prevent time invested becoming like a source of power and control? Because like you've talked about, like if you're going to start this organization, there's likely that you're not going to have 7 people who can get paid to do it or commit full time. So there is a sense in which like someone may give more time than someone else, and maybe it will be 1 people, maybe 2 people. And I don't think a lot of people set out for that to like kind of lend itself to kind of more consolidated control, but it tends to that. I mean, it tends to be, oh, you're the person always here, you're the person always available. We've been asked a lot, even as we've tried to like do co-pastoring, where does the buck stop?
Oh, which one of you is really in charge?
Yeah, and I think, and part of it is like the amount of time, and when there's not any quality of time on your leadership team, like how do you like not let that be that kind of that consolidation, also a consolidation of like decision and power control.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I'd say like you can even put 2 things side by side, like resources in general, right? So time and like money too. Like you may very well have people who are, if it's your denomination, or like who are like, no, we get a say in this because we're giving resources, or individual people who are giving time. There's basically like 3 types of power: structural, relational, and like cultural. The first thing is to accept that the people running it will always have the most of all 3. It's just gonna happen. And not to be naive about that, because it's just gonna happen. Now you can do basically your whole job on this sort of topic of leadership is to be stepping back from, not grabbing, even allowing or inviting other people to take portions of each of those sections of power: structural, relational, cultural. So like, what is an example of like structural power? Okay, so like structural power is like roles, responsibilities, kind of like who's running meetings, who's setting up schedules, like who's sort of deciding when events are gonna happen, or maybe like even the events the organization or the church is gonna put on. Relational power is a little bit harder to place your finger on. It's more about the idea of certain people, and you guys maybe be this kind of people, just are like really good with people. Okay, they're just really good with people, and because of that, like people just buy into what they're gonna say. Okay, and you all may actually have like a good bit of that in you, just the kind of work that you're drawn to. And because you have that people person sort of personality, you have power attached to it. Okay, it's just fact. And the third kind of power is like cultural power. Okay, this is like, these are the people, this Lady Carol, punching lady. She's just like a woman with like vision, okay? And she's also older, which might be part of it, but like she's got a level of authority that comes with her and a level of power, largely because like she's just very convinced about the thing she's gonna do. When she talks, people listen. That's kind of that third. So the first is kind of like the person the kind of people and the kind of power who are setting up systems and meetings and sort of these day-to-day operations. Operations might be a good word. The second is relational power, people who in individual relationships really have power. And the third is cultural power. They have vision and they have a voice that people listen to. So the first thing is, not just because of your time and other resources, because of your position, you will always have the most of all three. And your job is to, and I actually think that Nick is really good at this, is to specifically through those kind of strengths things that you guys talked about. Did you guys actually do Strengths Finder? Or yeah, I love Strengths Finder. Some people hate it, but I love it. Specifically, so like I might see that, you know, we might have a conversation that you, Morgan, are just like, you know, maybe you're not the pastor in this situation, I'm the pastor, but you are like really good with people, and you're like really like tender-hearted, and people like want to talk to you. I actually would imagine that would be true about you. Like, and my job as a pastor then is to create and usher you towards all that space possible, while also reducing the amount of space that I'm doing that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like a give and take. It's like, okay, well, Morgan, like, could we potentially get you involved in this deacon program? Could we potentially go together to sort of have some of these one-on-one conversations with new members, okay? So what you're doing there is you're kind of reducing and fighting. And my point is that like a lot of the reducing and fighting, again, will be a battle like with yourselves. Other people will want to just hand you the authority. That's just kind of how it goes. There's like one of my other authors that I really am into, like he writes a lot about flight to authority. Like we don't know what to do, and we don't know sort of how to do it, or we don't care as much as you do. We'll just do whatever the leader says. So to parcel out that power, to realize it's not ultimately your power to parcel out, but on some level you're the one being given it, so you're the one who has to make space for other people. And I think that Nick is really good at this. Like one of the things he does is sit down with people who are sort of new to the church, or who have been involved for a little while, but are looking to kind of do something more intensely. And he'll say like, what do you care about? Like, what are you good at? What are you into? Do you want to take this over? Do you want to start this? Like, there's no like, I have to keep doing this because it's my thing. It's, oh, you have abilities there. Let's give some of that power to you. Sometimes that comes with its own complications, because then what if that person doesn't follow through? And what if they don't do what they said they were going to do? So sort of be ready for some of those things. But specifically, like dishing power is important.
That sounds like plural leadership right there.
Yeah, it's Really, plural leadership, like my biggest belief is that plural leadership is like all these different ways to get yourself out of the way and invite others in. Like that's why we're focusing so much on how do you get yourself out of the way, because you're setting yourselves up in the way the organizations are set. It's going to be that you're the person in charge. That is what you're going to be. If you really want to have other voices, you're fighting against that. And sometimes you shouldn't fight against it. Like, remember I said, like, sometimes I think it's good that, like, okay, you're the person that's put all the time in with, you know, John and Susan and Dolores, and you should go ahead and ride out that relationship with them and ride out their confirmation or, you know, whatever it is that's happening in the church. Like, so don't hear me say, like, your job is to give all the power away. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, your job is to, where you can, desperately invite others in, allow their vision to become synonymous with, like, what's happening with the church or organization.
I think that fits in with giftedness well too, because then you're able to actually function in the place where you're most gifted or passionate, and others are able to pick up the places where you're not at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and having some sort of, like, whether it's StrengthsFinder or something else, like, I love StrengthsFinder not because it helps you understand everybody, but because it gives you common language which to discuss yourselves. Like, if you sort of understand the categories, then you have a common language that you're approaching it from. Because, like, you and I might talk, and you might say, what are you good at, Michaela? And I need this person who's looking to get involved. And I might say, oh, I'm really good at accounting, or, I do accounting and do bookkeeping for my business, and I'm really good at this thing and this thing. And I might name these things that actually, like, either I'm not that good at, or that I don't really want to give more energy in. Like, the number one thing that I've talked to people at NVC about is, like, when I ask, what are you into? The first thing they'll name is what they do with their job. And I'll say, okay, like, are there other things? Like, are there other things that you want to get involved in? You do that for 8 to 10 hours a day. And they'll say, oh, yeah. And then we'll start to discuss other things. So something like StrengthsFinder gives you a common language and doesn't, because again, you say the color red, I say the color red, we picture different reds. And when someone says, I want to do accounting for the church, we might picture very different things. So to have a concept of language is really helpful and important. I want to move to, we have to 11:30, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to move to other stuff so we can kind of get onto this. Let's see. Let's start with, these are sort of like things that enable plural leadership. The first one comes from the yellow book that you guys saw or Nick talked about. Did Nick talk at all about getting on the balcony? Okay, so it's called getting on the balcony. It's this idea. Have any of you guys ever, like, anyone here like a ballroom dancer, ever done like ballroom dancing lessons? Anyone here ever watched a movie that they do ballroom dancing in? Yeah. So you're thinking of it. I'm thinking of like the old Elizabethan, like big gowns, like that kind of ballroom dancing, right? There's like all these moves that are happening, and the whole room kind of has to like be in unison with each other. And I'm always thinking, man, what if you lived in an era where that was like what you did on Wednesday morning? Was like learn how to do that. Getting on the balcony is a leadership phrase that says you have to, as a leader, both be on the dance floor, moving and shaking, maybe, and up on a balcony, understanding how your participation and activity are affecting the room. So are you, this would be me if I went and did one of those dancing, are you the person who's going the wrong way? Like, are you the person who's tripping? Are you the person that's going faster than everybody else? Like, are people reacting to you with warmth? Are they wanting to, sort of engage with you? How are you affecting the room? The easiest place to start practicing this is like in a meeting. Okay, so one thing, I did an internship right after college at this residential counseling center for really high risk teens. Okay, and we had an internship meeting every Thursday, and my boss like always wore a cowboy hat and like one of those like, he was like Western. He's just one of those characters that sticks in my mind. And his big thing was that when we have meetings, we need to have hospitable meetings, okay? And we're like, what does that mean? And he'd say, Michaela, you're sitting too forward on the table and you're blocking, Suzanne behind you. Okay, so he's right. Like I wasn't practicing, I'm younger here, of course, but I wasn't practicing like good, like, I wasn't realizing how my place in the room was affecting someone else's. He'd say to me, Michaela, you look grumpy. Which I did, because like my like thinking face is also the same as like angry face. Also the same as confused face. So I've been working on those. Michaela, you look grumpy. Oh, if I look grumpy, there's a really good chance that everyone around the table thinks I'm grumpy, and it's affecting other people. Like, why is she so upset? Like, is she okay? Is she mad at me? Whatever else is happening in the room, this is now a layer of what's happening. The fact that I look grumpy. So, do you understand how your place, starting very simply at like a table, affects other people? And then more complexly, how does your place affect other people in a room or in an organization? Because again, if you're sending those sort of closed off messages, the space for other people's voice is like little to none. But if people look at me and sort of say, if their internal thing says, oh, she's open, like, she would like us to talk, and this is a participative thing, like that sets that sort of moment, right? Like sets a moment that everyone here is allowed to talk, and it's not just me. Now, if I had said, hey, I really want everyone to dialogue, and Rebecca said, oh, I had something to share, and I said, oh, well, not right now. Like, I want to keep going. That would have A, been a difference between my espoused theory and my theory in use, and B, would have negatively affected like how like the group proceeded. It would have shut that down. So knowing, and again, this goes back to the self-awareness, reflection, and discipline thing. Can you evaluate and understand how your position in an organization, an event, but even as simple as like a meeting table affects the other people? Have you guys thought at all about this kind of stuff? Like, you're shaking your head, yeah? Yeah. I was like really unaware at first. Like when I first thought about this and read this, I was like, holy crap. And I think that the really interesting trick is that you don't move from the dance floor just to the balcony, right? You don't check out and just sort of become uninvolved. You have to be at both places at the same time. So right now, I'm sort of looking at all of you, looking at the camera, looking at Andrew, looking at the clock, but still talking, still like there's these different things that you have to do. And when you forget to do those, you go into isolation and again shut down the people around you.
Sounds like an art. Leadership is an art.
That's a great way to put it. Because it is, right? It's not, going back to like, sort of what I was talking about earlier, it's not this like left brain logical thing, right? It's more of an intuitive, you're kind of relying on some different sensory sort of moments.
Because you're always at a disadvantage compared to everybody else. Every individual is at a disadvantage compared to other people looking at them. Because I can constantly observing you and seeing what you're doing and how you're reacting, but you cannot see that for yourself.
Right.
I actually found that like when in seminary, we would do speech and preaching.
Yeah.
Videotape it. It was so helpful because I was actually seeing the difference between how I thought I was expressing myself and how I was being expressed for others.
You're like, I do that.
Sometimes like I wish I could just have like a camera follow me around all day and like for like a week and then just be like, oh, that's what I was doing.
You should get one of those GoPro like head mounts.
Yeah.
Have you seen those?
The huge screen.
Yeah, with a huge screen.
Like one thing I thought about is like I thought about this years ago when I was a teacher. I was like, because I'm really tall.
Yeah.
6'4".
6'4", okay.
Yeah, and I posed this to another teacher who was like 5 feet tall. She this lady.
Yeah, that's
like,
a gap.
And we were talking about. I was like, I'm trying to figure this out. Like, how does my being tall, like, how has that affected like every part of my life? And I was asking her, have you ever thought about that? Like for you, like you're really short. Have you thought about like how that has affected how people perceive you? She's like, no.
That is exactly the kind of question I'm talking about, though. Like, how does my being tall affect? Like, literally, when you're preaching, like, people might feel like you're so tall, you're intimidating. Like, literally, you may take 5 steps further back. Like, I don't know. Like, my husband's 6'3". Like, he sort of has some of these same things. Like, and being tall is a really safe one to talk about, right? Because it's, it's not something you're doing. It's a part of your built-in person. Like, how does being a woman affect like my presence in the room? Like, how does being 30 affect the fact that I'm in teaching master's level courses and people look at me like, wow, like I usually get carded for alcohol, like, is she 18, you know? So like all these different sort of attributes, and then moving to also behavior, right? So attributes and behavior, I think that's great, and that's what a like self-reflective question to be asking yourself.
I don't know if I ever could really answer that.
Well, and the hard part is it depends on who you're in front of. So you have to know those people to know how you're going to affect them.
Yeah.
Their age, their gender, their culture, their education, their background. And it's like,
Yeah. So going back to those like self-awareness, reflection, and discipline, self-reflection is looking back. How did that go? How did my presence affect that conversation or that environment? Self-awareness is in this exact moment, like how is what I'm doing affecting people around the table? That is so insanely difficult, right? And self-discipline is trying to take the data that you've got from the first two and practice that in the future. Oh, I learned that like when I cross my arms like this, like it generally, you know, sends that grumpy message again. I'm trying not to do as much of that, so I will like, you know, keep my hands like this. Like things like that actually go a huge difference in how welcome people in a group feel to participate. It just does, especially if like in the planning stages of your church plants and your organizations, like you're gonna want to hear from a lot of people. You're gonna want to shut your mouth a lot and listen. My advisor, I was taking a class with him on the first day. This is actually the next thing. On the first day of every class, he walks into a room at Fuller Seminary and he writes, "Leadership begins with listening." And he has it on the board for like the first like probably 2 class periods. And he spends the first class listening, asking people, you know, actually a little bit like what I did today. I probably modeled that after him, like, what are your names? Like, tell me about the organizations that you're doing, so that when I'm talking, I'm not, you know, thinking I'm talking to 15 people who want to start youth organizations. Okay, well, no, this is like a group who's doing some urban stuff, you know, intersection of LGBT, like wellness, like I've got those sort of facts in my mind, like maybe denominational, urban. You want to be able to listen to like what people are saying. Also very hard when you're the person with the ideas, when you're the person starting, right? One of my professors in undergrad had this rule. I thought was, I carried it with me, I continue to. He has a counting rule. So you ask a question or you pose an idea, and then you feel, especially when it's new, and don't quite yet know the group or you're at a bigger thing, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I've asked something and no one's interested, and all these vulnerability things start to come up, right? He says, just start counting to 10. Like he said, just start counting to 10 in your head. 1, 2, 3. And if you get to 10, you've either asked a question that doesn't resonate or doesn't make sense. It's on you. But normally you don't get to 10. Normally people just need a little bit of time before they're ready to speak. So listening and setting up specific practices, whether it's through good questioning, asking, and then the other thing that you can do, this is so like, you know, very specific, but like if I said, you know, I wanted to ask a question, like, what's everyone's favorite color? Then I would ask my question and I would sit back, right? Because this is a listening posture. It communicates like, I'm ready to listen to you guys, you know? Whereas when I'm this, I'm kind of like talking and thinking and kind of up here. Literally starting to do those things will be helpful. And listening is the most opportune time for these different voices to come up, you know? And if you can listen long enough that voices are talking to each other and not to you, that's a really good place to get. A really good place to get. Even if you think we've gone off topic and we're not reaching the thing I wanted to talk about today, or my agenda's shot, just let it happen sometimes. Just see what do people want to talk about? What's sort of on their mind? You know, we've been talking about doing, we've defined wellness as this for 8 years. But when we sit down with these people we trust, wow, as they get going, they're defining it differently than we've defined it. Like, that's really helpful data. So as easy and straightforward as it sounds, like one of the most difficult things to do is to listen. The last one I want to talk about, and I'm kind of rushing through these because we have a few minutes left, is value the dissenter. give voice to the people who do not agree with you. So I say, plural leadership is when you have multiple voices talking about the same topic, going after things in a healthy way. And Klaus says, no, I don't actually think that's what it means. What's my first reaction? You're wrong. You're wrong and I'm right. My first couple of reactions are either to feel vulnerable, that you've challenged me, to feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be the person in charge and have the answers, or to just disagree with you, right? Okay, so again, sitting back, this is the chair video camera. Sitting back and saying, Klaus, tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me more is a good phrase because it doesn't say I agree with you. Because I might not agree with him, and that's okay if I don't agree with him. But I'm like, tell me more. And what I've said there is, it's okay to disagree with me. In fact, it's welcomed. Again, how you get off of the one single pastor, even co-pastor or co-organizational leaders running the ship and genuinely listening to the voices that have taken the time and energy to join you in leadership. For people to take the time and energy to join you in leadership, whether it's a few meetings or whether it's a kind of like the innovators group, more of an accountability thing, whether it's your board members or staff members, they're giving themselves. Like that's a really huge contribution for them to give their time. To value that and honor that, you want to give voice when they don't agree with you, but also just to set the precedent that there may be better ideas among all of you than ever I could have come up with. And that's a fact, right? And if you're not yet there, I would encourage you to do some work to try to get there. Like there may be better ideas among these people than I have to share or contribute. So basically, to value the people, that disagree with you. I rushed through those like fairly fast. I'm sorry about that. Like general thoughts, comments, like examples on this or on these sort of practices that enable multiple voices.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Like especially in the one that you were talking about last about getting on the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
Like, have you created people in your own life that also provide you some feedback in your leadership?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking of, like your spouse can do that for you, right?
Yeah.
But also, do you have any other people? Like, a lot of times it is difficult to see yourself, and so are there other close people that feel safe enough to come to you and say, hey,
yeah,
this is something that I'm seeing, or how do you even create that?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Because it can be a very, again, going back to the defensive thing, it can be easy to be defensive, like, no, I'm not, and people are afraid of that. As soon as you do get defensive, they're going to back down.
Right.
So how do you create that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a couple different things. There's like the inter-organization, like within an organization. So let's say this is 5 years from now and you're all running these thriving groups, okay? Specifically ask people to be that person, okay? So, Andrew, I want you to be somebody who always comes to me. Okay, well, that's nice in thought, but will he actually do that? You may need to go to him. Andrew, I'd like to sort of debrief what happened at this meeting. Like, I just, either don't know how it went or just want to get some general feedback on it. Once you do that it will start to be a pattern, right? Once you have established and broken down, and it doesn't mean that you won't have moments where you're like, Andrew, thank you, but no thank you. Like, I'm not feeling what you said because it was too much for me to handle. Set those people up. But when you're first getting started, you might not have the luxury of like that organization. And so like one thing that I do is I have a couple of peers, I have one theology peer. She's also getting a PhD in practical theology. I have 2 producer friends, and then I have 2 mentors who are older than me. And I go to these people regularly with situations. Hey, this kind of happened. Like, can you help me talk through this and work through this? These are people who either we've verbally established or it's just sort of the way we work, that are very willing to point out my flaws and my mishaps. That's usually the first thing they point out. Well, sounds like you could handle this really poorly, or it sounds like you need to go apologize about this, or it sounds like so-and-so has a lot of stuff that's coming up that you're not prepared for. So I would say, like, in the initial phases, before you have the luxury of kind of having that organization, to really actually go ask a few people. I'm looking for people who can help me grow in my leadership. That's the ask. In order to do that, I need people to help point out when I'm wrong. I need people to give me good critical feedback. And these may also be people who tell you, good job, here's a good pat on the back. Like, positive feedback is really important too. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I mean, I think it's just going to come a bit more naturally in some moments. And you may ask those same people. Like, and here's a great line that we use all the time in our business is what worked and what didn't. And that gives you two different categories. So what worked about how I handled that and what didn't. Like, okay, so we can just parse things out, and we know that we're not trying to give you like a letter grade. There's two different types of assessment, right? Formative and summative. Formative is like, I'm giving you feedback, like friend to friend, mentor to, person, or congregant to leader. And then there's like summative, which is like, you did very well on this. You got an A on this. You got an F on this. It's like to render a final judgment. That's not the kind of feedback we're looking for here. There's no rendering final judgment. We're looking for the formative stuff. We're looking for, okay, here's how you can kind of get better on that. Here's where you were excelling. Here's where things really came together, and here's where they didn't. So kind of having and giving people those categories. Hey, I'm looking for people to help me develop my leadership. I'm looking for people to help me work through things that didn't and things that worked and things that didn't. Could be a really good start before you kind of have your whole organization. I think we are at our time. You feel free, to get in touch with any more questions or conversation. But just like hearing a snapshot of what you guys are doing isn't enough. It sounds like you guys got some cool things that you're brainstorming, and just look forward for you guys to even the rest of this